I'm glad to be here. Nice to at least virtually meet folks. These kind of trips do, or these kind of opportunities do save us on travel, which is awfully nice. And you get to meet folks who are all over the country and which you might not be able to otherwise meet. So I'm happy to be here with you. Can you hear me okay, Meredith? Is it audio is good? Okay. So unlike some of the other talks you're going to hear today, this talk is going to be just a little bit different. One of the reasons that that I think it's important to think about food safety culture and how food safety culture can be looked at on your operation is because it touches on a lot of different aspects of what we do on the production side. And the best way to think about that is integrating it into your whole operation. So this talk is not a scientific talk. It's going to be a little different than my co-presenters, but bear with me. I think you'll get something out of it. So the first thing when they asked me to talk about food safety culture, I started thinking about, well, how am I gonna define food safety culture? It's one of those things that's kind of broad depending on who you're talking to. So I did what every good academic does. I went to the dictionary and I looked up culture. And when looking for the definition of culture, just like a lot of these complicated topics, there's a lot of different aspects to culture. It has many different definitions. And I think one of the best summaries I heard about culture is this one that appears at the bottom. It's customary. It's traits of a social group. They're shared by people in a place or time. They characterize an organization, integrated patterns, and they depend on the capacity to learn and transmit knowledge. So we'll talk a little bit more about this, but just think a little bit about what that would mean in our own culture. The other thing that I thought was interesting that touches on food safety, culture is also a verb. To culture, it means to grow. And I think, there's nothing more appropriate for a food safety talk than talking about growing microbes, but we'll skip that for now and talk more about what culture means. So in terms of the key concepts of culture, one of the things to remember is we learn culture by observing other people. We're doing this today. We're learning about our culture and what culture means within the context of this room. You can think about culture within the context of your own family. How do you pass things down from generation to generation in your family that are important? You do that by observing other people. How do your parents behave? How do your children behave? They learn that behavior by watching other people. The other thing to remember is culture is supposed to be shared. You can't have culture by yourself. Culture only comes between two people or between a group of people. You can only have culture and shared culture if you share it with someone else. So something to remember is that culture is an active part of our life. The other thing to remember is culture uses words and symbols and behaviors. It's a series of those things that tell people within the group, what does culture mean to us? What is important to us as a culture? So taking it one step aside from the food safety aspect, we can see that there are shared cultural values all over the place. And this is just one example. It's really integrated into our whole life. And you guys are all over the place, all over the country joining us in this room today. One of the things that is interesting is, depending on where you go in the US, you can find different names for soft drinks, and it's very regional. And I think it's interesting, the poor graduate student who had to put together this culture map of the generic names for soft drinks. Not only does it vary state to state or region to region, they've drilled down to the county within the region where these names are used. And you can see that there are various pockets of where the names for soft drinks, pop, soda, Coke, depending on what you call that soft drink, really depends on the shared culture within your area of the country, right? And how does that happen? It happens because people transmit that name, that accepted nomenclature, to the people who are around them, in their families, in their social groups. Our goal with culture is to integrate that culture into our life so that we are part of that area, right? So you may come from a different part of the country where you called a soft drink pop, and now you've decided, well, everybody here calls it Coke, so I'm just going to call it Coke, right? Like, it's part of the new culture that you're a part of. The other thing with culture is that it helps to define shared values within that group. So think about it from the standpoint of something like the land-grant university system. Most of us are familiar with the land-grant system. And when we think about the land-grant values, we can think about, research, shared education, like we're doing today, extending knowledge. These are shared values that define that land-grant mission. And it's really that transmission or the living embodiment of those shared values that helps to push that mission forward, push those values forward. The other thing to remember is culture is dynamic, right? It changes all the time. And, if we were having this conversation 15 years ago, we never would have been having it via our phones and Zoom, right? Even 2 years ago, we wouldn't have known what Zoom was. 2 years ago, if we were going to do this online meeting, it would have been with Skype, right? Zoom has exploded in its use because it became a part of our dynamic culture. The other thing to remember about culture is that it does change, right? And we can see this in our own lives. When we go to other countries or other regions, we might try a novel food and say, whoa, we really like that. Let's bring that back and try to make it at home, or let's share that with our friends when we get home. So culture pulls us in different directions, and it changes us and changes the world around us. The other way culture changes is over long-term exposure. And the example I have here is McDonald's. You can hardly go anywhere in the world without finding fast food culture from the United States. Almost everywhere in the world, you'll be able to see familiar cultural icons that look like home. Now, you may go into those restaurants and look at the menu, and it might be completely different, right? But it's the changes that this culture has made to that food that makes a difference. The other thing is culture helps us understand problem solving within the context of a group. So the picture I have here is from Peru. That when you live on a steep mountain and you need agriculture, you find a way to make it happen. You need food, and food production is going to happen in that area. So independent problem solving is another way that cultures drift or change as a part of their new environment. Okay, you may be asking yourself, how do you know all this nonsense about culture? Well, who teaches culture in our society? Who talks about culture? Has anybody in this group taken a foreign language? I can't see any pictures, so you have to give me like a thumbs up or a hand wave. A number of us have studied a foreign language in school, right? Well, it turns out I'm married to a foreign language teacher, and these are the people who talk about culture in our society. They teach culture. They talk about culture. They want their students to understand not just the words of the language that they're instructing, but they want them to understand the culture in which that language developed. So I went to those experts and I said, how do you teach someone culture? If I want to convey a culture to someone, how do you teach it? Like, what's the method that you use? And my wife, who's a foreign language teacher, said, we do it in 3 different ways. We talk about products, we talk about perspectives, and we talk about practices. Okay, products, practices, and perspectives. So what are those? Products are things that you can see: books, tools, signs, literature, words, right? Practices are actions that people do, right? Things that people do that are within the cultural context. And then perspectives are the values and attitudes and ideas that people hold within a culture. So if we're going to apply that to food safety, what does that mean in our operations? If we're going to talk to people about food safety culture, we need to do it in a way that makes sense within these 3 broad areas, right? So let's think about it that way. Food safety culture on your farms or on the farms that you visit starts with leadership. You are the person, if you're talking to a person who's in charge of the culture on a farm, that person is in charge and is responsible for success. If they don't demonstrate food safety culture on the farm, food safety culture is not going to happen, right? It starts with us, with leadership. How is that person going to know about food safety? Well, you have to become aware of those risks. You know, the context of today, we're going to talk a lot about auditing and about looking for hazards, looking for risks on the farms. This is what we're talking about: making yourself aware as much as you can of the risks that are associated with the commodities that people are growing. Help people understand who don't know that these things are happening. You know, outbreaks happen. We talk a lot about outbreaks in our small groups as we're learning more about them. The reason is not because we're fascinated by outbreaks. The reason is because we want to learn as much as we can from mistakes so that we can stop those mistakes from happening again. And it doesn't take very much digging to realize that sometimes we're good at that and sometimes we're terrible at that. We like to think of outbreaks as one-offs, but when you start digging into commodities, you can see multiple examples of outbreaks over time. So understanding why those things are happening and changing them is really critical. In terms of food safety culture on the farm, once you know something, knowing it means nothing unless you share it. You have to share that information that you've gained. You have to share this information with the folks that you work with. Empower everyone on the farm to be responsible for food safety, right? Food safety isn't one person's job. It isn't the food safety manager's job. It's everybody's job. And our goal is to make everyone aware that they are responsible for food safety. Because let's face it, if there's an outbreak on a farm and that farm is shut down, everyone loses their jobs, right? Everyone loses money. So it's not just the farmer, it's not just the food safety manager, it's everybody. Okay, so another aspect of this is use resources. Of course, this is going to cost some dollars. Sometimes implementation of change costs money. Other times it costs time in terms of training or increasing employee knowledge. The other thing to think about is how can you incentivize the knowledge or recognition of people who are doing a good job with food safety, right? And it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be lots of monetary awards. Those are great. People love money, but money doesn't really motivate you when you look at the science of motivation. What motivates people is a recognition that they have done a good job, that they have done something that makes them exemplary to their peers, right? And something simple like best scrub brush, best cleaner, a simple award like this shows a person that even though it's cheesy, they've done something that's better than their peers, that's more outstanding than anyone else on the team. And I think people really try for that. And if any of you have ever participated in a chili cook-off and won the golden spoon, silver spoon, whatever the prize was, which was probably a spoon taped to a piece of paper, you know that you have now earned the jealousy of all of your peers because they all want that award, right? Everybody wanted that dang plastic spoon that they spray painted gold, right? So the other thing to think about with food safety culture on the farm is it takes a commitment. You have to be committed. How are you going to demonstrate commitment? You have to hold people accountable, right? You have to have something that you can measure with performance, whether it's cleaning, thoroughness of cleaning. I'm not talking about speed of cleaning. Everyone thinks, faster is better, but the truth is you do want it clean with efficiency, right? So if you're talking about cleaning containers, it's not about speed, it's about how well you do it. And then document it. Show that you are holding people accountable, that you want this level of food safety culture on the farm. You're ready to measure it. You want to show and demonstrate it. And then you're documenting it. And we're going to talk a lot about audit schemes and auditing today. So documentation is part of the game. Okay. When we talk to farmers about food safety culture, a lot of times we're talking to food safety leaders on the farm, and they are learning and being educated and getting their certificates for the training, whatever the training we're giving is. But it's a very top-down approach. The leaders are supposed to decide what the food safety culture on the farm is. Managers are supposed to enforce that food safety culture across the employees, and workers are supposed to do what they're told by the managers to make culture happen, right? To comply with food safety culture. But I'm going to challenge you to rethink this model for food safety culture on farms. In reality, on a farm, everyone is responsible for food safety. Everyone is responsible for recognizing risks and has the same goal: lower the risk associated with their part of the farming operation. Whether it's a worker who's picking up produce in the field and notices a bird dropping or a deer scat in the field and is making a decision right there. There's nobody else. It's just that worker and his or her pick bucket making an instant food safety decision. Pick it up or skip it. Pick it up or skip it. Empowering that worker to know that skipping it is the right choice, and that if they do that, they are not going to be penalized. They should be rewarded for making a right choice, right? Managers are supposed to provide technical support for those people and encouragement for those workers so that they understand that was the right choice. Hey, I see something. Should I skip these? Yes, go 4 feet away, 2 feet away, whatever the ruling is. Encourage them to make those right choices over and over again. That's the way we ingrain food safety culture into our operations. And then leaders provide the resources to make food safety decisions happen, right? Very removed from the decision-making process. It's always the person at the front line who really needs the empowerment to make the right decision. So give them the ability to do that. Train them, empower them, reward them for doing those right things. And then assess it, right? Is food safety culture apparent on your farm? Are you doing what you say you're going to do? Look for it. Stand back, watch people. Make sure that they understand what they're doing. And if they don't, take them aside, talk to them about what's happening, and do a retrain if you have to. tell them how food safety is supposed to work on this farm, so that the next time they have that same decision to make, they'll make the right decision. Okay, so a lot of times when we talk about food safety culture, we describe it like this. Well, I'll know it when I see it. I'll know it when I see it. So what does that mean? How do you know it when you see it? Well, let's take an example. Let's think about when you have a worker who's ill on your farm, or you're talking to a farmer about workers who are sick. A very common model is if a worker is sick, they don't get paid. Where is the incentive for a worker who is ill to tell you that they are ill if they know that the reward for coming clean about being sick is a day without pay? They're never going to tell you, right? I would challenge you to flip that food safety reward and punishment methodology and say, if you tell me you are sick, I'm not going to send you home. I'm just going to put you on a job where you do not handle fresh produce, right? So now instead of going home, maybe that person rides a tractor all day, plowing or tilling or whatever they're doing, where they don't contact produce. They're never in contact with product, right? The change means I now have the ability to tell you when I shouldn't handle produce, not when you tell me not to handle it. I'm coming to you now and saying, I'm sick, something's wrong, I shouldn't touch produce. Completely different model than looking for sick workers, right? Watching people when they wash their hands after the restroom. How many times is this person going to the restroom in an hour, right? Have that person come to you and say, I am ill, I shouldn't be doing this. Okay. The other thing to think about with food safety culture is it needs to be adaptable. It needs to be flexible. You may grow different commodities. You may have workers that need to be cross-trained on different jobs in order to accommodate different approaches for food safety culture integration. It should be the whole team. This is not just a food safety manager's job. This is everybody's job, right? It's part of the products, practices, and perspectives on this farm. This is part of who we are. Food safety culture is part of our lived culture on this farm, right? We're not just making widgets, we're making food. And I think that's part of the reason why most of us got into this farming business in the first place, is to grow food to feed people. All right, so how are you going to learn more about food safety culture? Well, here's the thing. We're not the only people who are trying to integrate food safety culture into food production areas. There's lots and lots of articles out there about food safety culture. Most of them are coming from other industries, you know, the restaurant industry or the food processing industry. Read through that literature, find those nuggets that you may be able to use to help educate your workers, your farmer clientele, to increase their understanding of food safety culture on the farm. Okay,